recording.
All right. Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday night. March 28th here. Can't believe that Q1's already almost gone. My name is Dr. Colby, and I will be the one that is leading this call tonight. And we did this last month, and it ended up being a tremendous success. So we decided to keep the train rolling. And so we will be, at least for the next handful of months, doing this about once a month. Last month, we covered just the principles of holistic healing and what that means. We had a request or two if we could cover some specific topics. So this month, we're going to cover GI health. Number one, because we feel it's one of the most exciting and integral parts of healing. We're going to talk about all of that tonight. Next month, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I do believe we will be talking about allergies. And that'll be at the end of April. We're always going to do the last Tuesday of each month. So I've heard some things from our patients, not to get off track here, but oh, this year is just a bad pollen year. And when Alex and I hear that, we kind of always laugh to ourselves, like, we're allergic to pollen. That's pretty interesting, considering that besides the past 75 years, we evolved outside. So, interesting if you kind of go back to that context and really think about how we evolved and how our ancestors evolved, because we ultimately have the same genes and our genes don't evolve that quickly. So that'll be the topic of conversation next week, or excuse me, next month, we believe. So I know it was a little bit, there we go. I'm not going to be able to see all of you guys here, but we have this saying in our traditional naturopathic medicine approach that you must. It's not a what if, it's not a hey, maybe. The goal is, if you guys wouldn't mind, if you wouldn't just hit mute on your screen there, so we don't have dogs barking in the background or babies crying, which if we do, it's a-okay too. So we aren't that stressed over here because we're calm. But we have this saying in our traditional naturopathic healing that you must heal the hole in the middle. So the goal of tonight is to really explain this to you all. The goal of where we're going to go with all of this is, number one, for us to review what we spoke about last time. Some of you guys I see were on here, some of you weren't, no big deal. We're going to just take the high level principles of what we spoke about last time, and we're going to make sure we understand where we are at and where we're trying to go. Because in our opinion, that's what makes what we do unique. And that's a big reason why we get the results that we do, because we come from a holistic paradigm. And so we're going to talk about that first. Then we're going to actually explain in depth, I would say, about how the digestive process works. If you understand how it works and you're educated, then you can understand what's normal. Because almost all of our patients come in with us, and our first intake, we like to ask them all of the dirty and dark secrets about their poop and their stool and their bloating and everything else that comes with the digestive process. And what we find is that almost everybody has something or some problem with the process of their GI tract that needs to be improved. So if you understand what's normal, then you can understand what common problems you experience, and most importantly, what to do about it. You can understand what organs and glands and systems you have to support within the overall body. So we're going to spend some time there. we're going to talk about some external environmental factors that when we first trying to heal our GI tract that we have to avoid so that our lining and cells of our GI tract can heal. And we're going to talk about a few case studies. I'm going to give you practical steps and going to answer any questions at the end. So if you guys have any questions at all throughout the next, it's probably be about, I would say 40 minutes or so. If you want to either post in the chat, that's a-okay. I will do my best to help manage that. If not, Alex or Jess can help. But if you want to just ask me throughout our time together, I'd love to really make this an interactive experience rather than me just speaking at you for 40 plus minutes. So if you have any of your own experience, if you have any of your own problems, feel free to ask about them. Maybe it's not for you, maybe it's for your spouse, whatever it is. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask about it so that we can make sure that we're answering your questions specifically, along with understanding how it works.
Dr. Kolbe,
Yes.
should I be trying to take notes like crazy, or when you record it, will we also get a copy of it?
Yeah, you will get a copy of the recording. I do think depending on your style, it could help to take notes, but you'll get a copy of this entire recording.
Okay.
So I think that should help. I don't think you need to be taking copious amounts of notes overall. All right, again, I'm gonna maybe move this over here for now. I probably will be moving this back and forth here, but again, we're coming from a different perspective. We're coming from a perspective of holism, which is a little bit unique, again, even from many people that have experience in the alternative healthcare space. But from a very bird's eye view, a holistic perspective, the most basic understanding and foundation is that we, as human beings, health is our natural state, right? And that may be variable depending on certain circumstances or the health of our mom and dad or things that can impact your overall health. But where we start, we evolved on this planet for health, not disease. So when we have disease, it's an intelligent response to a violation of nature's laws. It could be spiritual, it could be emotional, it could be mental, or it could be physical. When we're thinking about holistic medicine and the holistic perspective, ultimately where we're at is that symptoms are the messengers. They're communicating to us that there's a deeper imbalance or there's something else that's transpiring that we must address. And so again, why we started our practice, which many of you guys understand this, if you don't, but we started our practice because we spent all this time with other holistic practitioners. And what we found is they were ultimately still coming from the same perspective. They were running more expensive lab work. They were recommending, some of my patients that I see when we first do the first intake, they will list hundreds of supplements. I'm not kidding you, hundreds. Like, how do you know if that works, right? How do you know if that perspective is actually coming and addressing the underlying foundation? And so when we're thinking about the holistic perspective, we're understanding that symptoms are always a blessing, and symptoms are communicating to us about what areas of our overall physiology need the most support. And in our medicine, we get a lot of our teachings, at least here in the US, from a man by the name of Dr. Henry Lindlar. He actually had a crazy huge sanitarium out in Elmhurst. He first had one in the South Loop, and then he moved out in Elmhurst, which is outside of Chicago, for those of you that aren't in the area. And he was, in my belief pattern, more of a philosophical man as equal parts as he was a practitioner. And the reason that I'm bringing up this, because we in our practice have been taught a specific lineage of how to practice this traditional form of naturopathic medicine. So it's been passed down, and we feel very blessed and very fortunate to have been the potential carriers to move this to the next generation. But ultimately, if you're experiencing anything throughout your overall physiology, we must think about these three pillars. Number one, we must detoxify the body. Our cells are constantly bombarded by toxins from the external world, which especially in today, we're going to talk about the food additives and the food industry, which I think you guys are going to be pretty happy and mesmerized by. If you wouldn't mind muting yourselves here, please, that would be extremely helpful for me.
So Colby, if you just click participants at the bottom, you should get a window and then you can mute everyone.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Thank you. Lovely. And so the first step we do with anybody that we're trying to heal is that we're going to help them excrete toxins. Of course, you guys know we like at-home detox routines, coffee enemas, castor oil packs, all of that good jazz. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight. But next, we're going to focus on pillar 2 with all of our patients or clients that we see. We're going to make sure that they're eating the right food for them, make sure they're sourcing all of the proper food, making sure they're avoiding the food additives that we're going to talk about tonight. And then the third pillar is we're going to stimulate the body's self-healing response. This can be through specific tools that we use like herbs or homeopathy. It can also be through your mindset and how you align with nature's principles about how we evolved. So before we get into the specifics about, hey, I have GI problems, what do I do about that? I think it is so critical to keep in mind that no matter what you're experiencing, you can feel better starting tomorrow. It's such an empowering aspect of what we teach and how we practice, but truly, if you follow these principles, you can get rid of the waste around you emotionally, spiritually, and also physically. You can improve what you're eating, and you can stimulate your self-healing by aligning yourself with nature's laws. So if you take anything from tonight, like the principles of what we teach and how we do it are some of the most important aspects for you so that you can be empowered to take control of your health starting tonight. And moving on to that, which I know this is going to be a little bit tricky, but I want to see some people here, is that we got taught this specific lineage. And this is Dr. Again, if you were on the last call, you've heard this already. So I'm sorry for repeating ourselves here, but Dr. Lindlar taught Dr. Carroll, and Dr. Carroll was told by Lindlar to take the medicine west. So we ended up in Spokane. And Dr. Carroll taught Dr. Dick, who taught Dr. Zeff and Dr. Dick as well. That would be his daughter. And they taught us. And so they're passing along the tradition of the medicine that we practice. Similar to yoga, there's a lineage, there's a traditional passing of the baton that we've been blessed to receive. And a lot of what we're talking about comes from this specific lineage. But Dr. Dick was known, he was a stoic and stern man in his old age. He was actually a plumber, or excuse me, he was a car mechanic before he became a naturopathic doctor. And he told both Dr. Zeff and his daughter that the only thing that matters in medicine is to heal the hole in the middle. So what we're talking about tonight comes from him. So I want to make sure that he gets the credit here. And want to make sure that those before us are recognized for a lot of what we're going to discuss here in the next half hour. And we know we talked about this last time too. It's not going to spend too much time here, but this is Lindlar's famous illustration about how disease happens, right? And you can read this quote on your own, but disease is not some accident, right? It's not some evil misunderstanding that you did wrong against God. When we violate nature's laws, the soil gets disrupted. This can be through the lack of self-control, indifference. I would just say either not knowing or not knowing what to do. So the roots of the tree get fractioned. And what happens then, the trunk of the tree, the three principles that we just talked about, you can't have the self-healing mechanisms in place. You're too toxic, or you don't have the proper nutrients. This allows for the branches of the tree to take hold, or what we consider to be the diseases that we call fill in the blank today. So today we're going to really prioritize the diseases of the digestive tract, but ultimately keep in mind that any disease that we experience comes from this principle. On this illustration, we oftentimes show our patients just so that we understand at a foundational level that your potential disease is an actual lesson. It's a lesson that God or the world, whatever terminology you want to use, is communicating to you about how we can improve our day-to-day life. And how we describe this tree in today's simplistic terms is simple, right? Many of the things we just talked about. You detoxify, you get the building blocks your body needs through the food, you practice on aligning yourself with nature's laws, and you focus on your spiritual, mental, and emotional components of healing. If you do these things, healing can take place, no matter how far along the disease process you are, that healing is possible. And today we're going to talk about what's it actually look like from practical level to heal your digestive tract. So it's first important for us to actually understand, like, what does your GI tract do? And what's this whole process? We oftentimes hear about it, we talk about it, but what's it actually do? So as a very high level understanding, the digestive process, it takes the food that we eat and it mechanically and chemically breaks those things down to be absorbed and then put back in place throughout the body so that our body has the necessary energy and building blocks that it needs to do all of the functions that it does. And then along with that, it takes the metabolic and environmental toxins or byproducts from the cellular components that are in our tissues, and it sends those back to the digestive process to be excreted through your stool. So it takes what we're eating and consuming, it breaks it down, it puts it where it's supposed to go, and then excretes the toxins. So it's a relatively straightforward concept, right? It's not some rocket science to understand. But I do think throughout time, we've mystified this experience. So I hope to make it so it's at least somewhat understandable. And so we're going to go through this more in depth, but ultimately, by the end of this, I want you to understand what part of the process, if it's showing symptoms, you know what part of the process needs support, and then you know what to do about it. So that's the goal. So when we say heal the hole in the middle, like, what's that mean? It basically means that the digestive tract is literally one long tube. It's actually outside of your own body. So it's one tube from your mouth to your anus. And at each section of the tube, there's different processes and cells that take place. And so this is why we say you heal the hole in the middle, because as you could imagine, if one part of the process isn't working appropriately or the way that it should, your body's not going to be able to extract or excrete what it's supposed to in that process. And when that takes place, we have serious problems, because what happens when you turn 45 or you turn 50? In our culture today, we believe that aging is a common problem, even though it's not normal. And so usually that's due to a long form chronic digestive complaint. So our body doesn't actually have the building blocks that it needs, and it can't detoxify what it's supposed to, which leads to a chronic problem at that time frame usually. For some people, maybe it's earlier. For some people, usually it's later. But if we don't fix this process, good luck. You can take the best supplements in the world. You can eat the best diet in the world. But if your digestive process isn't working the way that it should, you can't actually extract the necessary building blocks that you need from the overall food or nutrients or supplements or fill in the blank that you're taking. So it doesn't matter. Okay. A few other things I think is also important to understand is that serotonin, which we hopefully all know what that is, but it's basically it's a potential neurotransmitter that is oftentimes used throughout many reactions in your overall body. But serotonin is about 80% of it is in your digestive tract. So if you're ever feeling blue, if you've ever had bouts of depression, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes we see if you improve the digestion, your mood and ability to cope with stress improves. Also, the majority of your immune tissue, which is called your GALT or your gut associated lymphatic tissue, is found in your digestive tract as well. Why would that be the case? Because your body's intelligent. So your body is pushing its immune cells towards your digestive tract to protect your digestive tract from the outside world, because it's literally a tube, which the outside world is the food that you eat. So our immune system, our mental stability, our skin, those are three major components, but truly everything else is directly intertwined with this process. So if we don't understand that, we're going to have a tough road ahead of us. So what happens quickly? Your mouth mechanically breaks down food through chewing, and it sends specific enzymes to break down carbs. That then goes to your stomach, which has a very low pH. The stomach has a pH less than that of a car battery. So your stomach protects you from the outside world. It breaks down proteins and it activates enzymes, which then all of that gets pushed to your small intestine. And your small intestine at the very top of it gets inputs and gets enzymes from both your gallbladder and your pancreas, which help you absorb all of your food. So about 90% of food is absorbed here in the small intestine. All of that, along with the waste that comes from your liver and gallbladder, gets excreted from your small intestine to your large intestine, which has a lot of the bacteria that produces a lot of vitamin K and specific B vitamins as well. And your large intestine then basically forms what we know as your stool to be secreted through your rectum. So that's the overall process at a very high level. We're going to talk about that here. So we're going to talk about what's common is not normal. So we get this all the time. Like, I can't tell you how often we get this. It's like, someone comes up, like, we're like, well, like, how's your stool? I'm like, oh, it's good. It's good. It's good. A little bit shy. They don't really want to talk about it. And when we ask questions like, do you get bloated after you eat? I can't tell you how often the answer is yes. And that's because in our society, we've normalized what's common instead of actually understanding what's normal. If you're getting bloated after you eat, it means that there's some inflammation throughout your digestive tract. If it's shortly after you eat, it usually means it's coming from your liver and gallbladder. So your small intestine is inflamed because your body has an inability to digest fats. If it's a few hours after you eat and in your lower abdomen, it's usually coming from your colon. So if you're getting bloated after you eat, it means that some tissue along the line needs support. We're talking about how to support that next. Another common, but it's not normal. So be that gas, and so oftentimes you hear this as well, is that if you're experiencing gas after you eat, it means that there's some reaction that's transpiring where your body has an inability to digest certain foods, or the bacteria or other organisms in your digestive tract are actually fermenting and putrefying the food, which is causing you to have gas. So if you have smelly stool, it's happening shortly after you eat. again, coming from your liver, gallbladder, small intestine. If you have copious amounts of stool, usually comes between, I don't know, an hour to 3 hours after you eat. That's usually coming from your large intestine or colon. Another one we commonly see is a loss of taste for red meat. And now we aren't going to talk about this in depth, but we do believe in what we consider to be metabolic typing, that certain people evolved in certain places of the globe and they need specific higher amounts of animal protein or fat or lower amounts to balance out their pH. So there could be some of that at play, but specific to digestion, one of the first things we actually see is people communicating or answering that they have a loss of taste for red meat. When that's the case, the first thing that we think of is the need for hydrochloric acid, which is the acid that's in your stomach, because your body's intelligent. She's always responding in an intelligent and beautiful way. So when we can listen to that intelligence, then we can understand what to do to support her. And so when we have a loss of taste for red meat, it means we usually need hydrochloric acid. So because our stomach does not have enough acid to break down this dense protein or animal protein. And one of my favorite questions to ask, and even to myself, to understand how my overall physiology is to look at your tongue. I'm sure many of you guys have seen this, but this is the Chinese medicine approach to understanding what potential organs or systems need support. And we see that, first of all, we see with this picture that there's a white coating. A coating of your tongue can mean a few things. For me, from a Western medicine approach, it usually means that there's some yeast overgrowth, common sign we see. From an Eastern medicine approach, we can compare what potential cracks or crevices within your tongue are showing an indication that that specific organ or gland needs support. What we'll commonly see is we'll see different sort of cracks here on the side of the tongue, but most commonly what we see with digestive complaints is a crack in the middle of the tongue. And that indicates that your digestive tract needs some support. So this is a reflection. We're going to talk about the actual intestines and how there's reflexes within the intestines. But what's so amazing when you understand the holistic perspective is that the body's always communicating. And when the body is communicating, what that means is that every part of you, your ear, your eyes, your colon, your feet, they have reflex points that we can understand about how the overall body is doing. And so I just think that's such an amazing perspective and intelligent response by the body, is to put out the information right in front of us so that we can understand what we need to support without expensive lab work or this MRI or CT scans, which can be helpful at times. But more importantly, we understand the principles that our ancestors knew about reading a pulse, looking at a tongue, seeing reflex points on your feet, looking at your eye. You can pretty quickly look at someone and help them in a very prolific way. So we talked about common symptoms that people experience that aren't normal. So what's normal? Normal is an easy to pass, formed medium brown bowel movement. There's no undigested food or mucus or blood in the stool. There's no gas or bloating. And ideally, we want 2 to 3 BMs, ideally within 30 to 60 minutes after each time we eat. Also, ideally, we want a light pink tongue with no cracks, so that especially in that digestive region in the center of the tongue, there are no major issues. So before we move on, any questions at all for me? Anybody have any questions or comments or concerns, or does any of this resonate with you or correlate with you about your own experience?
I guess for me, so if I understand correctly, your tongue should be light pink. And if not, then that kind of means that there's the overgrowth of yeast.
Yeah, that would be one interpretation if you have a white coating on your tongue.
Got
So
it.
again, that would be coming from a Western medicine perspective, but one of the first things I ask about is what's the color of your tongue? Because if your tongue isn't that light pink and it has a white coating, it usually means there's some sort of yeast overgrowth.
I'm resisting the urge to not look at my tongue right now, so I'll do that after and reassess. Thank you, Dr. Colby.
Yeah, of course. And again, that's, as you know, Christy, it's all about information. And so we're just taking information and applying it little by little in a cohesive framework. So oftentimes I look at myself and I'm like, whoa, what did I eat? What did I do? Right? It's a learning experience for myself as well. And so I think that's a really wise perspective to assess any sort of healing. And so I just think that's a good perspective. Vic asked, what do you do? What happens if you have a yeast overgrowth on your tongue? I use a specific product that has oregano oil in it. That would be one use. But I think the broader question is understanding, again, we'll talk about this next, but what environment have we created to allow for something that's usually beneficial and always there to become an overgrowth and potential problem? We're going to talk about this here in the next handful of slides, but number one, did you have any long use of antibiotics? First place I always go to when someone checks that on our intake paperwork. Number two, are you consuming any animal foods that contain antibiotics? Because the majority of antibiotics are actually used in the production of animal products. Number two, I think about like chicken and what type of chicken you're consuming. Almost all chicken sprayed with chlorine, even if it's organic, killing all of the good bacteria within your GI tract. Number three, like, are you eating the proper foods at the right time? We'll talk about food intolerances next. So all of those things come to mind.
Hey, Colby, we got a question from Marcus.
Yeah, copy of the wonderful tree/root page. Yeah, of course. That's also, if you look online, if you just do the Linlard Tree of Healing, that'll be there as well. But it's a good picture. And again, all of this is just a reflection. The tongue, the reflex points on your foot, the reflex points in your colon, iridology in your eye, your ear as a whole. All of these are just reflections that your body's communicating about globally what's happening. So yeah, Alex posted it in there. So just quickly to give you some stats from the CDC, which, it estimates that 60 to 70 million Americans are impacted by digestive complaints yearly. This includes significant ER visits. It also includes chronic illness. It includes things like, I just listed a handful of things that we see the most often here, but this could include like someone having food poisoning, so they go to the ER. It could include like someone having chronic constipation where they can't go to the bathroom, they go to the ER. So it's a wide variety of things. But the one thing that I want to say is that everybody, every single person that we see has some form or potential area, I should say, where their GI tract can be improved. And if you have a chronic disease, if you have some problem that you can't solve, it means that at some level, we have to heal the hole in the middle because your digestive tract needs support. So I think realistically, this number is relatively low because everyone we see is bloated after they eat, or their stool's inconsistent depending on what they eat. So I would say that in my estimation, about half of Americans experience some form of GI complaints regularly. And so now we're going to go through the process really quick about what areas of the stomach produce what symptoms and how that connects to different supplements or foods you could potentially eat depending on what you're experiencing. So the stomach, right? one of the first organs that takes the food, it uses hydrochloric acid, it breaks it down further. If you're ever experiencing heartburn and it happens relatively quickly after you eat, individuals that consistently have bad breath, their stomach needs some support. And these individuals, when they talk about their overall physiology, a terminology that I usually hear is they feel inflamed. Right? They just feel like every single time they eat, there's some response where they feel very inflamed. And usually, in my opinion, and what I see is that because they don't have enough hydrochloric acid to actually break down the food. So what's happening is large amounts of food are moving to be absorbed, large particles of food are moving to be absorbed by the small intestine, but they're too large to be absorbed. And so what that creates is either heartburn, because it changes the pH in your stomach, or it creates a deep sensation of feeling like you're inflamed or extremely full after you eat. So here are a few supplements that I recommend. These are standard process that we like, but there's plenty of options out there on the market. Zypan, Gastrex to specifically help, and chlorophyll, which these are specific for GERD. But also, like, what foods can you eat, right? So what you want to do is you have any sort of ulcer, any sort of peptic ulcer, we want to stimulate the healing of the lining. Cabbage juice, like, I cannot tell you some of the crazy things that I've seen and experienced with cabbage juice. If you juice and you have any sort of tissue in your digestive tract that needs support, cabbage juice works like a charm. Peppermint tea and also ginger here are very useful to help the lining of your digestive tract. So your stomach's one of the first things that we do when we're trying to assess your digestive tract as a whole. If you're not experiencing heartburn, if you feel inflamed, or your overall feeling a sense of blah, for lack of a better scientific word there after you eat, you usually have to address your stomach. Next, we're going to talk about your pancreas. So again, your pancreas, what it does is your pancreas basically sends in other enzymes so that the food can actually be absorbed the rest of the way in your small intestine. So these are individuals that usually at a half hour, I would say to closer to an hour after they eat, you have some sort of pain, bloating, or gas. Like, those are very common symptoms that your pancreas needs some support. The pancreas kind of has a wide variety of symptoms, but pain and bloating and gas would be ones that I would definitely note. Or if you're eating higher amounts of carbs or proteins, if that doesn't sit well with you, usually your pancreas could use some support. With that, we use digestive enzymes, which, as you can see here, at least with our patient population, the majority of people are coming in on some form of digestive support. But if you don't know the symptoms and where they're coming from, you could either be spending money or you could be taking things that could potentially be hurting you, because you have to be taking the proper supplements that are supporting the proper organ that needs support. So that's why I think it's important for us to go over this, because if you're taking a probiotic when actually you need digestive enzymes to support your pancreas, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And that's what I think is crazy with the health world today, which, we feel very blessed, I should say, that a lot of our patients come educated. But if we don't understand the foundational principles about how some of this works, you could literally be spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on things that are making you worse. Like, it's true. And we see this with almost everyone that we see. So just go through this, understand what symptoms are correlated with what organ and system, and then you know what to do about it. Like, it's great information. So what do you do when you're experiencing any sort of problems with that? Well, first, you have to decrease the amount of animal proteins and carbs you're consuming, because your body's having a hard time breaking that down. So, I know many of you probably have heard of sweetbreads, but those are great. Garlic's also good. And this is where the dark leafy greens can be helpful for individuals with pancreatic problems. If you take it to the extreme, individuals that have pancreatic cancer, like we almost always advise those individuals to really decrease almost all amounts of animal proteins and fats and really stick to more of a vegetarian-like diet, because number one, their pH, but also two, because their pancreas is one of the major players at play that actually helps to break down those foods. So if you can't break them down, good luck. So next, we're going to move on to the liver and gallbladder. This is actually probably the most common symptoms that I personally see with individuals that have that need some form of GI support. What's also interesting about this as well, just want to make sure I don't answer all these questions.
Yeah, we got a number of them up top, but we can go through them systematically when you're done, Copes.
Okay, sounds good. So your liver and gallbladder, first of all, your liver has upwards of 600 functions. So many cultures, specifically those in the eastern part of the world, think that your life force or your energy force or your chi or your vital frequency actually comes from your liver and not your heart, which is an interesting perspective. It goes to show you how important that many cultures besides the Western cultures think about the importance of this specific organ. It has 600 of what they know functions. Like, that is absurd. And when you specifically to the digestive complaints, again, bile's being produced here, which excretes toxins and helps you absorb fat soluble vitamins and fats as well. The gallbladder, it takes that and it basically condenses all of that to be excreted. So that's how the process here works. And people will oftentimes have a different presentation when they're experiencing a digestive complaint or just complaints with this specific organs. So you see here, there's some interesting symptoms like burning feet, dry skin, inconsistent stool, headaches after you eat, pain between shoulder blades. And I believe personally, that's because the liver is so fundamental in the overall physiology of the body. But I see many people that present with a liver and gallbladder problem as systemic issues. It's not just like I get bloated after I eat. It's like, well, I get weird pains here or there. Things are inconsistent. My skin isn't very good. I get burning sensations in random places. To me, when I hear those sporadic symptoms around and around, the first thing that comes to mind clinically to me is thinking about the liver and gallbladder. And so what do? You can take bile salts. You can take, this is a really good product that we like that contains beets. And beets, in my opinion, are some of the most beneficial food you can be consuming to support the bile flow of your liver. So the bile flow will overall flow easier to the gallbladder, which then will basically flow easier into your small intestine. So here's some other things for you. There is this concept in holistic medicine that like cures like. So oftentimes, like sweetbreads and like everything else we'll talk about, if you have an issue with the organ, it can potentially benefit you to consume that type of food from an animal. And there's always caveats here with the quality that you're consuming, where you're sourcing it from, if you actually need that support. But as a whole, that's an interesting concept to think about. So if you have any issues with if you have any of these symptoms, an easy fix could be trying to find the highest quality organ of an animal you could be consuming and making it in a way you can consume. So next, we're going to talk about the large intestine. Again, the large intestine is where a lot of the bacteria and the vitamins and minerals are made as well. We also have, if you're experiencing copious amounts of gas, where it kind of feels like there's just what I want to call gas bubbles in your digestive tract, that means it's coming from your large intestine. Okay. One of the most common signs that we see as well with your large intestine is that your TFL, which is the specific muscle that runs on the outside of your leg or your quad, right? So it attached at your hip and runs to your knee. That is tender. Can't tell you how many athletes that we see that are like, oh, I massage out, or they use that little gun thing, I forget what it's called, to like massage their TFLs, and always like, my TFLs are tight and I don't understand why. If that reflex point of your body is always tight, massaging it out is not going to help. It means that your colon is inflamed. So if you look before an NBA game, before any sporting event in the pros, you see these people rolling out their TFLs. Don't waste your time. What it means is that they're superior athletes, and even though they're eating a horrendous diet, their colon's inflamed, and massaging it out isn't going to improve the organ function. So what you do is you support the bacteria and you support the pH of this organ. You can do things like yogurt and kefir and sauerkraut and coconut water. But most importantly, what we're going to talk about next is like what to do about this. Like, what do you do when you're experiencing some of these symptoms? We gave you some recommendations about specific foods or supplements that you can take. We can post our full script account. We can get access to all of these supplements and feel like this is something you need. But what I recommend first is to think about the principles that we're going to talk about next about how to heal your digestive tract and go from the top down. So it's kind of what I was speaking about before. We saw the tongue. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but many people have seen the reflex points on the foot. If you haven't already, iridology is a really cool practice that we used to do when we had an actual physical location of looking at the iris and seeing how the iris has the full body mapped out in there. And next we have the reflex chart of the large intestine or colon. So this is coming from one of our favorite nutritionists, Bernard Jensen, which some of the people that we have followed and loved throughout time, and they had some tremendous ideas, and they were true pioneers of the overall natural health movement. But Dr. Jensen discovered through his research of colon cleanses, which we're going to cover next, is that there's reflex points similar to your eye and your feet and your tongue and your ear of the entire body mapped out on each side of the colon for specific organs and systems. Again, like how amazing is the body that it's always communicating. And so from Dr. Jensen's perspective, which I believe this to a degree, I do think that things have changed a bit in our crazy culture, but he would put everyone on a 7 or 10-day colon cleanse. And what would happen is you're basically taking bentonite clay and psyllium husk, which is binding all of the toxins within your colon for you to excrete through an enema or a cholemia, which is what he recommended. And what he would find is that depending on the person, they would have specific parts of their colon that were impacted or weren't functioning appropriately that would correlate directly to different organs or systems. So if you want to look at this more in depth, you can do a quick research or quick search online with all of this. Just do the Bernard Jensen bowel reflex points to see, hey, I'm having an issue in my thyroid. What potential part of my colon needs some support and love? And he oftentimes did this research through autopsies. So he would dissect a body and he would uncover the person, let's say, had an issue with their left tonsil. He would be able to correlate that. And that's oftentimes how he got the map of this, which is such, again, an amazing tool from the body. So I'm going to pause. You've got some questions here. I'm going to pause here and just answer some questions.
I would go all the way to the top at Mariana.
Yep, here we go. So you mentioned that 90% of food is broken down before it gets to the large intestine. What about the other 10%? Do coffee enemas get rid of the 10% of nutrients? No, I don't believe that coffee enemas are really having the liquid to go that far within your colon. So the other 10% could oftentimes be also toxins that are within the food or that your body doesn't naturally absorb. I think oftentimes we think that our digestive tract absorbs everything. Like that's not the case. It's a complex system, as we've uncovered, that has multiple variables and points. So not all of the food is absorbed, and oftentimes that's passed into the colon to be excreted as toxins. How do you increase stomach acid? Brenda asks. Oh, you increase stomach acid by, number one, taking hydrochloric acid. You can also do the reflex point as well. So if you go under your rib, if you go, which I have a coat on, so it's a little bit challenging, but if you go under your rib, right at the bottom of your sternum, and go to the left side, an inch out and an inch down, you can rub that point. And if that point's tender, it means you most likely need hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is a tough one because it's basically a loop that has to take place, meaning you need hydrochloric acid to absorb and break down specific proteins, but also to convert specific minerals to be absorbed, which then make hydrochloric acid. So hydrochloric acid, two easy fixes or potential things would be to take a hydrochloric acid supplement, or would be to potentially decrease the amount of animal fats that you're consuming, or excuse me, animal proteins you're consuming, which are hard to digest and need hydrochloric acid. And on top of that, also, I would say eat as slowly as you can, because if you break down the food more mechanically, you won't need as much stomach acid. Roberto asks, does it matter when you take the supplements or foods to help increase stomach acid? Should it be before meals or could it be at the start of the day? You definitely want to take them before you eat. Yeah, so I definitely prioritize that. Because again, that cycle happens where you need hydrochloric acid to absorb the minerals and vitamins and break down the proteins to make hydrochloric acid. So if you take them between meals, oftentimes you won't be absorbing the things you need to take that. Mariano says, I've read that raw cabbage isn't good for those with thyroid problems. How about cabbage juice? Is that the same? I don't know about that, honestly. I do find that juicing tends to be more easily absorbable. But I assume that's probably because of the compounds that inhibit the conversion of your actual thyroid hormones. But I don't know about that answer completely. I do think that cabbage juice is oftentimes, when you juice something, it's much easier to be absorbed. So I assume that's probably not going to be a factor there. Can we juice beets/celery and get the same effect, or better to eat raw? Juicing's fine. I think especially celery and beet juice is one of my favorites because it helps to thin the bile. So when you thin the bile, you're going to be able to absorb your fat-soluble vitamins more. You're going to be excrete the fat-soluble toxins and absorb fats better. Are digestive enzymes better before a meal, or can they be taken during/after? Do you have any recommendations? Yep. I recommend Biotics or Standard Process. We can link our full script. You can definitely get them all there. Again, when we're trying to support our digestive tract, taking things that are going to support the digestive process is what we're trying to do. Because when we do that, we'll absorb the foods better, which are going to help the digestive processes better. So I definitely recommend enzymes, hydrochloric acid, take before you eat. If you recognize symptoms belonging to different GI organs, which area should you address first? Great questions. I'm going to answer that in a second. So it's a great question. Can digestive enzymes be harmful if not needed? I don't see why that would be the case, but I would just be clear about the indication of why you're taking them. Supplements are tools, right? They're tools that are used as you're addressing the foundational principles of healing. So if you understand why you're taking them and what supplements, what symptoms you're supporting, then once those go away, you stop your supplements. And that's our education process, is that when we're working with clients one-on-one, like so many people are just taking things because they read some influencer or some blogger online that they think they should take this thing. Like, you could potentially be hurting yourself. So just be aware of why you're taking something and the desired outcome because of the symptoms that you possess. And when those symptoms go away, stop what you're taking. Like it's not crazy. So is burning feet for the liver described when you walk or when inactive? It's usually upon waking. So that's usually the case there. Okay, awesome. So we're going to move on here. I know we're going a little over time. I have some things we want to talk about. So Roberto, I think, asked, how do we heal? What's the process? What do you do when you're experiencing multiple symptoms? Well, you first go top down. We'll talk about this in a second. You start from the stomach, you go to the small intestine, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, and then you go to the large intestine. So top down always. The first step you do is you're going to avoid the irritants that we're going to fly through here. Then you're going to support the organs that we talked about above by using supplements and specifically food as well. Then we're going to talk about more detailed raw cleanses that I love talking about. So when I was researching this, I was actually mind blown, to be honest with you. And I would say I'm pretty educated on the space, but holy cow. Wow. You want the good news or bad news first here? But I was always told there's about 4,000 to 5,000 food additives that are oftentimes found in the food industry. Was I mistaken? And the reason that this is important, because if we're eating food additives and we're eating chemicals that are within food, like antibiotics or pesticides or herbicides or fungicides, what oftentimes is happening is that it's disrupting the microflora, which is this entire organism of systems that's happening within your digestive tract, right? You're only 10% cells. Let that sink in for a second. You're 90% other organisms, including yeast, bacteria, funguses, parasites. All of these things are actually constantly interacting in our environment, in our digestive tract, and on our skin. And so the goal is to avoid irritants and to support the organs that have to be supported so that we can make sure that that micro ecosystem that's happening has all of the tools that we need to be successful or that they need to thrive. And so one of the first steps that we always talk about is you have to eat real food. Any additives and any of this stuff is going to completely disrupt that ecosystem. Imagine if you went out and you're trying to garden and you threw some MSG or you threw some brominated vegetable oil or you threw some high fructose corn syrup on your plants. What would happen to that soil, right? The soil ecosystem would change, creating a disruption of the environment of the plants. Same thing happens in your digestive tract. So just to be clear about the resource here, which you guys can look at this resource online. It was really interesting. It's like a 26-page resource that was really interesting for me. But basically what happened is that there was the Food and Drug Act, which I believe was in the 1920s, let's say 1926. And then after that, what happened was that we started to add foods in the food supply. And so we created this Food Additives Amendment of 1948. The issue of what's transpired within the food industry is it's obviously gotten extremely complex. So even the past 10 years or so, what's happened is there's been these loopholes within the actual industry that the manufacturer of the food additive or food supply, they do their own studies and they determine the safety and the overall health potential consequences of what they are potentially adding to food or potentially producing. So we see like this horrendous opportunity for corruption to take place, right? Because if you have hundreds of millions, let's just say tens of millions of potential profit to make, and your fine's going to be 100,000, like you take the fine all day and you continue to show the FDA that your product or your additive is safe. So you can look at this at more in depth, but overall, if things were produced before 1958, they're already approved. So that's part of this piece of the pie here. If things have been reviewed or they're just contain what's called a GRAS substance, this would be like whole milk or wheat or fill in the blank. It doesn't include the modification of those products that happen today, but those things are still grandfathered in. Then we also have the USDA and the EPA who approve how many pesticides can be used and the impact that has on the food supply. So you have multiple players at play here. And what you see is that there's a large percentage of the food additives that are in our food supply that either an expert panel determined they're safe or the manufacturer as a whole determined they're safe. And so you see this leads to a huge potential for corruption to take place, which is why you hear almost everyone say, oh, I went to Europe and I ate whatever I wanted and I felt fine. And my belief about that has always been it's because of the food additives and the chemicals that are used in our food supply. So what do you do about this? And we always communicate this to everybody that we work with, and I should say everybody that I love, is that if you're buying things in packages, it's going to be a struggle to be healthy. And I wish I could make your life easier and have a simple magic wand that I wave, but ultimately, things in packages where you don't know where they come from, it is impossible to be healthy. The first thing I would do is cut out everything in a package. You eat whole foods. So next, we're going to talk about how far food travels today. And again, let's tie this back to the GI conversation. But if we're eating foods that contain a lot of irritants, it's going to disrupt the ecosystem within our digestive tract, which is going to hurt everything else downstream. So a Michigan State study, again, I'm sure this has even increased even more the past 20 years, but the average morsel of food in our country travels about 1,400 miles, which is fairly long. And the average US meal has food from 5 different countries in there. This is compared to local produce they compared to Iowa, which on average travels 56 miles. So we're all about finding the local farmers, finding the local produce, buying things in season. Like this is because when food has to travel 1,400 miles, the processing, the additives, the storage, the nutrients, all of that's impacted, which is directly going to impact your digestive health. Why is that the case? Because for food to be stored and travel this far, to sit on a shelf for weeks at a time, to then be consumed by you 5 to 6 months after it's been actually plucked from the ground, whatever it is, they're going to have to add things to the food supply that's going to be irritating your digestive tract. So huge component of the overall food system is how far things travel. Shop local, find farms in your area, do your own homework and research, which we have all of those resources if you need them. Next is the ag industry. Again, I think you guys probably all know this. It's pretty well known throughout our culture, but glyphosate, it directly impacts your digestive cells by creating small holes in the cell that allow for large particles of food to come in to create an immune response, or also known as leaky gut. Roundup is used throughout the ag industry. It's the most commonly used chemical, but there's hundreds of chemicals that are also used, right? These are things as herbicides and fungicides. So it's not just glyphosate we have to be concerned about. It's what chemicals are being used in our food supply and what can we do about those, right? So again, you got to know where your food comes from. You got to buy the cleanest food you can. And you have to understand that this is now happening worldwide, where almost all the food you're consuming, if you don't know where it comes from, is sprayed with a Roundup Ready seed, which is basically there so they can spray the chemicals on the seed so that they can kill the grasses or the weeds within the actual field, which impacts you as the consumer, but long term, for the everyday farmer in today's world, like, good luck. How are you going to compete if you don't have this, right? And so I think this is where we oftentimes can get to blaming and shaming individuals, but I think it's more important to understand that currently we have a system that's not meant for health. And our goal through these conversations and working with us is just to educate y'all that there's an opportunity for you to make the right choices that's going to be good for the environment and good for your health long term. So here's another interesting stat about the antibiotic use comparing animals in the US, which is in orange, versus use in human medicine. So we talk about antibiotic resistant strands. People, in my opinion, aren't usually educated about that conversation. And they don't understand that the majority of antibiotics, which it's actually declining over time, so which that's a positive, are actually used in whether it be the feed that's fed to animals or whether it be the animals as a whole. And, this is, again, it's a time and place for everything. If you are extremely sick, I do believe there's a time and a place for an antibiotic, and same with an animal as well. But the issue is that when these are overprescribed, it creates these MRSA resistant type bugs that are ubiquitous and now kill up to 300,000 people a year. So when you disrupt the natural flora of nature, you're going to be consuming that food of that animal that is going to have the potential for that antibiotic to then be consumed in your food, right? And so this is where it's really important. I mean, we see here out of 1,000 people in the US in 2015, almost 9 out of 10, almost 90% of people were prescribed an antibiotic, or excuse me, this is for the amount of people for all overall antibiotics that were prescribed. A high amount were prescribed. So again, do the best you can, know where your food comes from, source it properly so that you can avoid these irritants, because if you're eating these irritants in any capacity, if you're eating out, like you're being exposed to all of these things, guaranteed. So it's not about being perfect, it's about knowing what cards to play when and how to mitigate the risk. And that's how you live life in today's crazy, unhealthy world. And so I'm not going to talk about this too much because Alex really hammered this home last talk. So if you want the recording for last time, email us, let us know. We're going to cover this the most, he'll cover this much more in depth then, just being aware of time here. But this is how we approach it. An intolerance is more important than an allergy, which is more important to a sensitivity, which is more important than a lectin. Thing about this role like this, then what you'll understand is that understanding your intolerances is one of the most important aspects because it decreases the immune response in your digestive tract, which usually decreases your response to an allergy. This might not be perfect because you may have an allergy from a vaccine that you potentially got exposed to or other pretty strong immune reactions, but sensitivities come third and lectins come fourth. And this is because, in our opinion, a food intolerance is a direct response of how your body digests food. So when you eat your food intolerance, it does not allow the food to fully be digested. So it ferments and putrefies and gets absorbed as toxins. When you absorb those toxins, you experience oftentimes overt GI symptoms, but also just symptoms overall through your overall health. And so you can read more about that here, but right, this is oftentimes what we call toxemia, or your body being toxic through the food you consume. So number one, you have to eat clean food, because if you're eating irritants, your digestive tract's going to be SOL. Number two, you have to avoid your intolerance, because when you avoid your intolerance, it decreases the irritants. Number three, you have to know what symptoms you're experiencing and what supplements or food to incorporate to support those specific organs or symptoms that need support. And number four, you may have to do a more intense cleanse, which is oftentimes what we have to do. Oftentimes we have to do a more intense cleanse with many of our patients. And V.E. Irons worked with Royal Lee of Standard Process, and he worked with Jensen as well. Just a quick note about which I think is one of my favorite stories in all of our perspectives is that V.E. Irons started because he was really sick in his 40s, and he basically studied for 20 years and healed himself and then preached that to the world. He started his second family when he was 76. He had his last kid when he was 82. It's pretty bonkers. So if you think about someone who's got health, he had robust health enough to conceive a child. I think his wife was 29 at 82, I believe was his final age. I know he started his second family at 78. And he attributes a lot of that to doing a colon cleanse like he recommends. And another interesting thing here, I just put this quote here, which I love as well. You can read that on your own, but there's many different forms. You can water fast, you can colon cleanse, what I just talked about, you can bone broth fast, you can do a raw milk cleanse, a juice cleanse. The reason you do this is because 70% of your energy every day is spent digesting your food. And that tissue is usually inflamed. However, those cells can reproduce, depending on where you're at in the digestive tract, every 3 to 5 days. So oftentimes when you do a cleanse, what's happening is you're replenishing, or you're allowing that tissue to send all of its worker bees to the area to heal. And when you do that, you're able to have a better digestive function. So before we move on, love to get answer any questions here. So the 80s, that's a great article. Tiffany asks about DMSO and EDTA, colloidal silver. I mean, I think all those things are okay, depending on what you're trying to do, right? Like usually these things are used because they allow for things to be absorbed easier. So oftentimes they're used on your skin to absorb things easier. To me, it'd be like, what symptoms are you experiencing and how do you want to improve? Because I think oftentimes we get caught in the weeds when the foundation or the basics aren't necessarily there. I'm not saying this is you, Tiffany, because I know you, and so it's not that, but it's just an overall thing. Oftentimes I would rather spend my energy focusing on the basics rather than prioritizing like DMSO or EDTA, because those may have a subtle benefit, but what has the greatest benefit is understanding exactly what you eat. And so I'm going to run through a few cases here. I know I'm going a little bit long, so I'm going to hammer these out really quick. And then I'm going to give you 2 action steps you can do starting tomorrow. And then from there, I'll answer any questions. So if you have any questions, you can post in the chat, or we'll be able to ask here at the end. But I saw a patient, she was 28 years old, extreme UC flare. She was already into health. She worked at Northwestern. She was going to the bathroom 12 to 15 times a day, loose stool, extreme pain in her left lower quadrant, daily blood, like a lot of blood in her stool, both old and new blood. She had mucus in stool. She had bloating every day upon waking. Like her digestive tract was showing signs that it needs some serious support. She was diagnosed, I believe, about 2 years prior to seeing me, but she currently was experiencing a major flare because she just moved from Hawaii to the States. And she also had extreme fatigue. So she saw multiple MDs. She was taking prescription probiotics. She was taking long-use antibiotics. I believe she at some point took a steroid, but I don't know if she actually utilized that. She was prescribed one. She was already doing like a lot of the right things. She was making the majority of her food at home. She was cooking almost everything at home, exercising daily, yoga as well. Well, what do? We did what we always do. This is why holistic medicine is so amazing, because even with the most complex cases, if you understand the basics and you understand the principles, everything can work. We avoided her food intolerance. We had her do dry skin brushing and cold showers. She also did castor oil packs. She was drinking at one point 3 cups of cabbage juice, a fresh cabbage juice a day, with 2 cups of homemade bone broth every day. She did that for the first 3 weeks. Supplements, we gave her colostrum, okra, we gave her enzymes, we gave her some drainage to help actually drain the tissue energetically. So no caffeine or alcohol. We only focused on restorative practices. We had her start her spiritual practice, really prioritize that. And within 8 weeks, everything resolved. Within 8 weeks, within 2 weeks, her BMs changed. Within 4 weeks, they basically were normalized to 2 times per day. There was no blood, no mucus, no anything else. Within 8 weeks, everything was what I consider to be completely normal. And in terms of her energy, it drastically improved. She had no napping during the day, but what I didn't write on here is like her peace of mind. Like she was going to the bathroom when she was at the hospital, like multiple times a day, unclear what she should eat, afraid to go out and do things with her friends. And emotionally, I think this really advanced her own life because she was able to know exactly what to do and have the tools to resolve it. And this also, I believe, helped her with her marriage and spiritual life as well. And next we have a 30-year-old that came. These were all of her complaints. She was living in Indiana. super into health. Again, like she was doing what I would consider to be healthy strategies. She was cooking at home. She had a good support system. And what do? I guess, let me recap what she was experiencing. She got food poisoning, and ever since that, never the same. Inconsistent stool, bloating between meals, usually lower abdomen. Her gas was occasionally smelly, worse with these things. Her menstrual cycle, like heavy, heavy bleeding, clotting. Her breasts would become very tender. PMS. She got headaches that she usually took over-the-counter pain meds for. Her skin was definitely worse. You'd get like little red dots or whiteheads. And she tried all these things before, like, again, relatively healthy before. We had her avoid her intolerance and eat a good diet. She was doing coffee enemas. We had her incorporate a lot of fermented foods. We supplemented some of this. There's also some more I added. We had her decrease her red meat consumption. A lot of self-reflective practices, a lot of breathing for her. There's a lot of like tense energy in her abdomen. So we had her breathe, we had her meditate, we had her move that energy within her abdomen. And we see here today, like her BMs are normal, her menstrual cycle completely normalized, her PMS decreased. She had basically no clotting, less bleeding, her energy drastically improved. Her skin was A-okay, no headaches since working with us. So everything really improved. But again, we're doing the basics. We're doing the foundations of health. And before, so I like to say is that before we try crazy things, if the foundation of health is not in place, it doesn't matter what you do. And that's what I hope to reiterate again and again and again to everybody, because the foundation of health is how you heal. And so Alex talked about this last time, but I'd like to just bring this in charge, is that we talked a lot of how to heal the digestive tract today, but also keep in mind the digestive tract is one of the primary organs of excretion, right? So if this isn't working, not only are you not getting the nutrients that you need, but also the toxins you're trying to excrete won't be excreted as easily. So it's a two-way street that's being impacted, right? So an action step that I want you to do starting tonight, is I want you to chew your food. I know your grandma, your mom used to always say this to you, but so many of people in our society, in our cultures, eat while they're on the go. They eat while they're on their phone. They eat while they're on their laptop answering emails. And they don't actually properly chew their food, which it not only mechanically breaks down your food, but the consistency of that food should be applesauce. Animal proteins need more, but it also energetically primes your body to be put in a parasympathetic or rest and digest phase. I can't tell you how beneficial I've seen this for some people with the most chronic illness. This is also why doing a juice cleanse or some sort of cleanse inherently helps to heal your digestive tract, because the particles of food are already broken down through the cleansing or juice. So you have the capability to do that yourself. So don't pass on this. Next, one of the foundational principles, and just so you know, in our food intolerance, we do evaluate food combinations that I think are more specific than this. So I want to put that as a caveat. But as a whole, here is a simple principle that you can use about understanding what to eat and when to eat it. Because if we're eating the wrong foods at the wrong time, what oftentimes can happen is those foods are not absorbed or digested properly, which leads to the change of the environment if it's happening over and over and over again. So an easy way to approach this, if you're having any sort of GI problems, simple is best. That's the first takeaway. Number two, we want to try to avoid proteins with starches. Okay, potato and red meat, I'd probably stay away from. Okay, next, we want to basically eat fruit by itself. So fruit should be eaten a few hours, I would say 1 to 2 hours after you eat anything else, which I struggle with that personally. But as a whole, the rationale behind this is that different foods, depending on how quickly or how many carbs they have in them, in a very easy to understand way, are digested at different rates. And so fruits are digested very quickly. So what happens when these foods are digested very quickly is the body utilizes hydrochloric acid enzymes, all of the resources, to break down the food. So when that happens, this protein comes down the line, this animal protein, and all of the resources that the body just used to break down the fruit have been used for the fruit and can't be used for the harder to digest food. So naturally, we want to try to eat fruits alone, potentially, and we want to basically avoid a lot of starches with a lot of proteins. So this is just an overview. We analyze people's food combinations and they're very specific, but as a whole, this is an easy to understand takeaway for anybody who can implement strategies in their eating tomorrow to feel better. So that's it. That is my longer than expected presentation tonight. I'd love to answer a few questions. So Marta asks, a bone broth cleanse? It's great. You consume bone broth as much as you want for as long as you can. I love a bone broth cleanse. Like I'll do a 24-hour bone broth cleanse whenever. The next question from Luis is, can spirulina powder cause gas? And add it to carrot, beet, celery juice. Yeah, I think that should be fine. Again, I don't know your specific case, but as a whole, usually those type of superfoods are relatively clean as long as the quality is clean and can be added briefly. You're asking if can it cause gas? What I would do is I would put it in the carrot, beet, celery juice for 3 days, and I'd put it there not for 3 days, and I'd see what happens. And ultimately, you're your best experiment. And so if you're constantly experimenting on yourself, then you'll be able to know instantaneously. What other questions do we have? You can either unmute yourself for more of a conversation or post a question in the chat. Love to take maybe 5-10 minutes, answer any questions that I haven't gotten to, and wrap up. Anybody want to share their experience or what they learned or what potentially they can improve starting tomorrow?
Yes, I will say that I will eat liver. I will do it. Not today, but I will do it. And I will attempt a bone broth cleanse. And I make really good bone broth. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. I learned more and I have more to research because I love to research and find out more information. Thank you, Dr. Colby.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's great. Again, giving yourself your digestive tract some rest, I think, is one of the best things you can do for your health. I mean, this in January, I did a 7-day water fast, which was extremely intense, but the clarity that you experience when you give your digestive tract some time off is an undeniable experience. It's one that I believe everyone should do. And if you think about how we evolve, every culture across every continent has some type of fasting in their culture. Like our ancestors knew best. So the cleanses I would describe more as fast potentially, where it's giving the resources of your digestive tract the adequate amount of time to repair from all of the additives and pesticides and fill in the blank that we're exposed to every day. And an easy way to do that is to do some type of fast. They say that with the recent studies, I think it came out in 2018, that doing 24 hours, a 24-hour water fast, doing that allows for your bacteria in your digestive tract to reset. So just one day of 24 hours can have an extreme impact. So any more questions? We're going to have a 40, I think it's going to be a 48-hour special where if you don't know your food intolerance, it's truly one of the most beneficial experiences you can possibly do. So because you spent time with us tonight, if you haven't received that yet and you would like to, if you follow the code, if you use the code follow your gut 20 for 20% off, then you can get your food intolerance for 20% off, which if you're going to start anywhere, I would start there. I mean, it's one of the most powerful tools. do you add minerals to your water during the water cleanse? During the water fast? No, I didn't. But I get Spring Valley Mountain Spring Valley water delivered to my house, which is a high quality water that comes with minerals. So if you were feeling lightheaded during any, add a little salt. That's kind of how I recommend doing it, but it's an opportunity. So just to be clear, everyone heard that. If you haven't gotten your food intolerance evaluated, if you use the link in the bio or that in the chat and you use Follow Your Gut 20, you'll get 20% off, which I can't recommend that enough. Like, we're going to provide you all tools. If you want to take the information and know your food intolerance, you can thrive. I mean, it's truly possible, but it's where I would start. So we got maybe one more question. Anybody have one more question for me or want to comment on what they learned or anything else? Well, awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys staying around.
I have one. So the cabbage juice,
Yeah.
I have cancer and I do carrot juicing every day.
Great.
I can stick the cabbage right in my juicer with the carrots.
Yeah, it's tough to say because I don't know your specific case, but I think doing cabbage juice as a whole would be okay. I mean, I juice cabbage as a whole, but that's something that I would definitely talk to your practitioner about directly before I recommend something that may be going against your overall plan in place there. But as a whole, cabbage that is juiced is usually an easy to digest food that can help the digestive tract. But again, if you aren't experiencing any like overt GI symptoms, which cabbage juice would be specifically good for, something like if you're finding blood in your stool, or something of if you have extreme heartburn, like those would be the primary indications of cabbage juice. If that's not what you're experiencing, then I probably wouldn't waste my time with that. I would prioritize other potential opportunities and nutrients that would support your specific symptoms the best.
Okay, I'll wait and talk to my practitioner in 2 weeks.
Well, good. Well, good.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it for tonight, folks. You'll be getting this emailed to you. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy we're able to share our knowledge and expertise with all of you. If you have any other questions or thoughts, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll see you at the end of April, where we'll be talking, I believe, about allergies and why they may not be the pollen in the air, that oak tree that's in your backyard. They may be coming from a process that's upstream, that's creating the environment for your body to respond to things that we evolved with every day. So have a great rest of your night, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Y'all have a great evening.
Bye, everybody.